Recording now.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. This is, and welcome everyone to today's episode of our little ongoing podcast, which we are tentatively going to call the Four Stooges.
Name pending, thank you very much.
Name pending. There we go. Name pending.
Or liberal stooges.
Four liberal stooges. We'll figure out a name one of these days, or we'll just go as this is the podcast with no name. How does that song go?
The podcast formerly known as the Three Stooges.
There you go. There you go.
The Three Stooges, the Four Stooges.
I want to economize.
My name's Rueben Vargas. I am the leader of the Our Revolution LA social media and social media chapter. So without further ado, go ahead and introduce yourselves, everyone else.
I'm going to break the silence.
I'm David.
And let David go first.
There we go.
I'm David. I am, I don't know what I am in ORLA, but I'm something. And what else should I say? I think that's good.
I have no defined position within any hierarchy except those that I create myself. So, Dreadlord of Mars, any other titles, please add therein. I'm a member of ORLA, and one of the four misfits chosen to be on this particular program. Steve.
I'm Steve the Philosophist. This here is my cat Rin, and I'm also a part of ORLA, also with a name pending. I'm the treasurer, longtime participant, activist, and I like to think things. So okay, so let's get on with that, I guess. What are we thinking about today?
So today's topics, there's a lot of topics here today, guys. So I think we should probably start off with the Bessemer, Alabama union vote. Last Friday, it was announced that the workers at that particular plant had overwhelmingly voted against a union. However, there have been More Perfect Union and a couple other union organizations have alleged foul play on behalf of Amazon, up to and including trying to pressure USPS in order to create fake drop boxes and otherwise intimidation. So the National Labor Board will be involved, and it seems that there's going to be another vote. So does anybody else want to add to that particular situation?
Well, it's typical that in a labor, what is it called? It's in any situation where organized labor is a concern, that that management is going to be bearing down hard on these folks. I mean, not only threatening their incomes, not only threatening their livelihoods, not only, especially during a pandemic when they're most vulnerable, but also bombarding them with all sorts of anti-union propaganda. You know that they're in what is it called? It's mandatory meetings, being what is it called? It's ministered to by labor relations experts, but I like to call them what is it called? It's union busters.
Right.
It is not an enviable position for the organizers. But I mean, like, you know, even had the results been different, I think it was still going to be a terrible uphill battle for these organizers to get this facility to organize. I mean, what was it? The vote came out to, like, it was essentially 2-1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another thing that we also have to take into consideration here is, I mean, it's. I think that it's important. Even if the union vote failed, they are going to get another crack at this. But I think more importantly, the good work that Ken Klippenstein of The Intercept and various other outlets has done, revealing, or at the very least making more apparent to everybody else about how things are so bad within Amazon warehouses that warehouse workers are literally peeing into bottles and drivers are pooping in bags. I mean, even if this vote were to have failed, I think that the Amazon, up to the highest level, and I'm talking Jeff Bezos here, they are in damage control right as we speak. So I think that good did come out of this, even though it wasn't the intended result that we would have wanted. In this case, the Amazon workers and the Bessemer, Alabama plant organizing properly.
I'd like to say like one quick thing here. How dare they? No, like seriously, how dare they think they can waste the company's time by peeing in freaking bottles whilst on their shifts?
Mhm.
Who do
Yeah.
these urban people think they are? I mean,
Hey.
I'm a minority. I'm sorry.
But
So-
like what I thought, or I'm sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I was just gonna say, bigger picture here. I find unions to not be the proper solution to our economic issues. Not shitting on unions at all in terms of like, if you're pushing for a union, have at it. Like, don't stop what you're doing. Well, necessarily anyway. My thinking is that it's like a small hill, but it's still Sisyphusian in nature. You're constantly pushing the boulder up the hill, and it's going to constantly roll back. They're going to keep finding ways to bribe union leaders. They're going to keep finding ways to ruin your rights as a union through the law, or your right to unionize through the law. Whereas an actual solution that will that might be a bigger hill at first, but there's actually a top of the hill, is worker-owned co-ops. Like, I think that's the thing, is we should get out of the idea that the union is the only answer, I guess. If anything, is what I'm pushing back
I
here.
actually agree with you quite a bit on that. Yeah, I have a very similar view to mutual aid, in the sense that it's dealing with the symptoms of capitalism as opposed to driving towards the root cause. Yes, unions are great, but you're still operating within a paradigm in which you are still the weaker party. You don't own this business. You have influence because you all decided to get together, but would you rather have control? Would you rather have democracy within your workplaces? These are things that, I mean, we have political democracy. Why not economic democracy? I mean, it's like second nature. Why put up with an unequal relationship in which you have to fight to have even the slimmest of says?
In an ideal, go ahead, David.
Well, and that's the core argument of the economist Richard Wolff, right? Is worker self-directed enterprises. And I think it's an excellent point. Which the point he makes is, we think of ourselves as living in a democracy, but the place we go to 40 hours a week is not democratic.
You do not live in a democracy.
Well, and obviously the democracy word is the whole thing. But also, to speak further to that, I thought what was interesting was there seemed to be a dynamic where workers couldn't decide to vote for or against the union because they were afraid, if there was a union, that the warehouse would be moved. And that was kind of like this looming shadow or threat in the background. So I think that really speaks further to that point of, like, even if these workers had voted in favor of a union, it wouldn't necessarily protect them from the abuses of corporations like Amazon. And all of this, of course, in the backdrop of Jeff Bezos, earning so much, becoming a billionaire, right, last year, or he was already was he already a billionaire?
I think he might have hit the billionaire mark last year, but yeah, he was
record profits. He's the richest man in the world.
His wealth is considerable. Let's say that. Yeah.
Yes.
And he's sitting here, and he actually he approved his company for making like public statements on Twitter against this and everything, and it's very obscene.
It is,
like that amount of wealth, and to push back against people who just want to maybe not pee in a bottle, like.
To add to this, I think a little bit of historical context is needed, because certainly this isn't the bad old days of union busting, in which Pinkerton agents who literally were the first private detectives were hired to physically to crack skulls and otherwise gun down union workers on strikes. Where it was certainly, it's not those bad old days, but that doesn't mean that union busting techniques aren't just as formidable, especially in our technological age, where I wouldn't be surprised in the least if Amazon was hiring private investigators to dig up dirt on various organizers. And I mean, they did it with the guy Smalls. Was he
Chris,
the one?
yeah. In point of fact, there was a great many leaked communications, and they were at the highest levels talking about Chris Smalls and trying to tarnish his reputation, because
Right.
he was catching on. And shout out to Chris Smalls and the what is it called? It's the Congress of Essential Workers, who are trying their darndest to unionize. What is it called? It's the folks slaving away in Amazon facilities.
And to that as well, I recall back when Hassan Minaj had his show Patriot Act on Netflix. He did a really good episode, I think, informative episode on Amazon. He pointed out that the retail side is actually losing money in the same way that Uber is, because they're pursuing complete and utter monopoly. The real profit is in their Amazon Web Services, where they literally rent out server space to big sites out there. Basically, most of the sites that we use, in fact, I think it's like a third of the internet, if not more, is Amazon Web Services a web space, basically. So with that in mind, like, yes, nobody's going to argue here that that Jeff Bezos has an obscene amount of wealth, but it's also scary that at this point, I think it says more to where we don't have the kind of state infrastructure to deliver needed commodities. There's nothing like that on a state or a governmental level. We depend on private enterprise to do this, and what comes out of this is the utter abuse of the workers, to where, like I said, they're peeing in bottles and pooping in bags to keep up. I would say that, and I do agree with Steve's point that unionization is one aspect of it. But I would like to reiterate that if the powers that be at Amazon were so scared of this one location unionizing, you can only imagine what will happen if a plant succeeds in doing so. I've heard that the one of the Chicago plants, they're considering unionizing. You best believe after this, there are going to be plants all over this nation that are going to make the attempt to unionize. So as far as I'm concerned, watch this space, because it's only a matter of time, I truly believe this, that Amazon does become unionized, basically.
And also, I would mention, like, at the very least, with some idea that when you come to the negotiating table, your starting pitch should be high. I would say it's even still a little low at this bar, but raise that bar at least up to where you start out by demanding what I think would be proper justice in this case. If a corporation, a publicly traded stock corporation, has committed serious atrocities towards its own workers, then the punishment to them and every corporation moving forward should be, you're going to be under threat of being forced to give your corporation to your workers, to form your corporation into a worker-owned co-op. You can get back something that might, pass for, you still had your investment, but the massive profits that are coming from these workers, not going to be for you anymore. It's going to be to them.
In a more ideal situation, our government would be threatening nationalization right now. At minimum, they would be threatening breaking up this monopoly. But the Biden administration seems only too happy to continue things the way they are, vis-a-vis the fact that he hasn't done anything about student debt or the kids still in cages should tell you everything about what they think about what's going on in Amazon. But I feel those would be topics that we could discuss for another time. I think we're all in agreement here. Solidarity to complete and uncritical support to the people who are attempting to organize within Amazon, and all workers in general, actually. Solidarity and uncritical support to our brothers and sisters working who are now considered essential labor and aren't really being compensated the way that we would hope essential workers should be.
Agreed.
Yep.
All right, so I suppose we could probably move on to our next topic, the Yang New York City mayoral race. Now, I've been looking at it a little bit. It's been touch and go for me. I know that he I think I might have read a tweet about how he essentially put his own foot over his mouth and saying that there's a business issue within New York, too many independent businesses, but I could be wrong. David, do you know more about Yang's ongoing mayoral race?
I haven't followed it that granular. I know that I understand there's been like a lot of media sort of scrutiny of him, and I was really just curious to hear your guys' thoughts, because I feel like Andrew Yang has gotten mixed reception from progressives and leftists. And I find myself unsure of how much I like him, I guess, or like his platform. I think he deserves credit for, bringing the topic of UBI to sort of mainstream attention in the Democratic primary debate.
Okay, I'm dropping it in the chat. Actually, he tweeted earlier today at 7:00 Pacific Standard Time. You know what I hear over and over again, that NYC is not enforcing rules against unlicensed street vendors. I'm for increasing licenses, but we should do more for the retailers who are paying rent and trying to survive. Now, I think it's very pertinent to point out that it was Eric Gardner who was an unlicensed an unlicensed vendor, and it was Eric Gardner, right, who so many years ago, I mean, all these instances of police violence, they're so numerous that they all kind of, and it's tragic, but yes, Eric Gardner was selling loose cigarettes on the street. The police intervened, and he was killed by the police. So for any serious candidate, I sincerely believe, to say that, the problem we have in New York is unlicensed vendors, it's like, well, how do you plan on enforcing it, Mr. Candidate? Because I think what's unsaid is that he intends for the NYPD to enforce this kind of stuff, and we've seen what's happened, basically. That's my take on it. Does anybody else have any takes on it?
I definitely don't like that tweet. Definitely things like that. I feel like there's lots of little things like that to me with Andrew Yang that sort of stack up and make me sort of side eye him. I think in general, I have a sense of like, I think it's cool because he's leading in the polls, as I understand, and he is sort of like this outsider. He is sort of like an outsider. But yeah, stuff like that, like it makes me feel agnostic towards him.
And to be fair, to be giving a little bit of context, there's this reply to the original tweet he made. I'd like to bring more unlicensed vendors to the legal market, education for immigrants / non-English speaking vendors on rules of vending, opening more spaces for legal outdoor vending, working with small businesses to broker tensions, all would help. At the same time, it's like when you lead on the fact that your major concern is unlicensed vendors, you put yourself in this sort of, that you're being almost antagonistic towards these vendors in the first place, basically. And I know that here in California, we don't have, in New York City, you hear about bodegas all the time, these small little, almost like grocery stores that sell just about everything and anything. We don't have that kind of thing here in Southern California, but I would believe that there's quite a few of them that are unlicensed, basically. So I just sincerely believe is that, Andrew Yang, I don't think he's from the New York area. I think that he's coming into this situation, or at the very least, not from New York City itself. And I think he's coming into this situation blind.
What part of New York do you think he's from, I wonder? Oof.
I'm gonna guess Wall Street. I would have to. I mean, the guy's the guy's a venture capitalist, so I would have to guess by default Wall Street. But I think what's going on is that Andrew Yang, he had this genuine mojo during the 2020, during the presidential
Primary.
contest. And he had this mojo going in with, hey, let's make universal basic income a thing. And with the benefit of the ongoing pandemic, he's being proven right, basically. But I mean, Bernie Sanders was proven right in hindsight with this pandemic that universal healthcare should be a thing too. I think that at this point, Andrew Yang is being found out for who he really is, and that's an out of touch capitalist who sincerely believes that the what you could call the solution to everything and anything is to hope that the capitalist class can be reasoned with, basically, when I would think that most people would realize that there's no reasoning with them at all, basically.
So yeah, I would want to point out there's a lot of, like as has been stated, great ideas and great positions that Andrew Yang has held, and I want to give him the benefit of the doubt and the charity to believe that he genuinely believes in a lot of those. But that being said, yeah, he's made some comments that make it clear that he's a bit out of touch, and there is a certain issue of his perspective that's not really widened as much as it should be for the kind of progressive politics he's pushing for. Also, I hold grudges, and I still don't understand the reasoning in any way that makes faith in terms, or sorry, sense in good in terms sense in terms of good faith of why he threw Bernie under the bus during the primary. Right? He
How
can
did
say
he throw Bernie under the bus?
he endorsed Biden.
Oh, he did?
While
Bernie was
still running.
Well,
Rather than wait, what my question is, what did that serve you, Andrew? What was the real conversation happening behind the scenes? And be honest with us. Like, if you even feel like you're forced to do something politically, come out and tell the people what you are legally allowed to say in terms of how you're forced to make certain decisions that look like this, right? Because honestly, Biden, he got the vote that he was gonna get regardless. He was not winning. Like, when he got thrown under the bus by the others, not including Yang, right? Bernie was proving to be the better candidate by all rights. He was leading, and then they endorsed Biden suddenly. That flips the primary votes. That flips what's going on, but that is also not looking at the fact that the actual populist who had a better shot against Trump was the one you threw under the bus, all of you. And it doesn't matter that Yang did it last, he still threw him under the bus before Bernie was ready to call it quits. So I say, yeah, no, if it was a battle, if it was war, I'd be like, you're not a motherfucker I want on my team, because you're just going to stab me in the back when it's convenient.
It's a trust issue is what you're trying to say, Steve.
I feel it might be a bit more difficult to place this sort of blame on Andrew Yang, that he wasn't part of the Super Tuesday gang that essentially sank Bernie Sanders' campaign when the first major primary came along. He endorsed after it seemed statistically impossible for Bernie Sanders to actually win.
But it was before he conceded.
It was before he conceded, but I mean,
Right.
What did it benefit?
If he conceded, if he decide to take it all the way to the convention, would it still be a stab in the back? I mean, like, you're 1,300 delegates down. Your endorsement's not gonna matter much in the grand scheme of things.
But then, what good did it do for Andrew and his career in his campaign to even make the endorsement?
I feel the same way towards Kamala Harris made the endorsement before Bernie dropped out, but when it was kind of mathematically clear And I feel the same way towards that endorsement in terms, I mean, obviously she's VP now, and so there was probably some sort of discussion there. But I
That was
feel similar.
despicable. Yeah.
I feel like, to me, it's like, why not wait for Bernie to drop out? Because it was already at that point where it was pretty much going to happen. But why not wait for Bernie to drop out? And then, because it's sort of like you're basically now going to piss off X amount of people, as opposed to waiting till once Bernie drops out, then no one can say anything because you're basically just endorsing Biden over Trump. So I didn't understand that when Harris did it. I didn't really pay as much attention to when Yang did it, but to me, I don't quite get it.
It's obvious.
It's an interesting choice. It's an interesting choice, is what I would say.
It's obvious in that there were clearly backroom deals that were made. Biden wanted the endorsements before Bernie dropped out. He wanted to win, and he talked to people behind the scenes. I can't prove what he offered them, though, as noted.
Pete's freaking transport secretary. I mean,
what happened to Amy Klobuchar? Did she get anything?
Klobuchar's what is it called? It's chairing a committee. I mean, like, well, actually, the Klobuchar thing is something entirely separate. I think that she got jumped for vice president because she was gearing it up, but then when freaking I don't entirely remember which one. I think it might have been. I think it might have been her that sunk Elizabeth Warren's sort of, half-hearted bid to jump on the ticket by suggesting that, it should be a black woman. And it just sort of removed their ability to come in. But if we're going to rehash the primaries, I mean, the real people for whom these I mean, like the question of like whether or not this endorsement was something despicable and, the result of a backroom deal should be probably the big three that showed up the day before the primaries, frickin' Beto, Pete, and Amy Klobuchar. And let's also, take into consideration Elizabeth Warren, who split the progressive vote.
Who didn't endorse. And like that totally deserves.
And she lingered. She was the one who I must admit lingered. That was the stab in the back. But I would go so far as to say that Andrew Yang, he didn't have pull. He waited until it was decided. The betrayal was already made. It was over.
To kind of add to this, if we are going to relitigate the 2020 primary, I would like to point out that this was an unprecedented amount of Democratic candidates, and I think this was all planned from the jump, that we all know that Bernie was going to run. Let's try to throw everything that we can at him and just muddle everything. And what happened, the results of the Iowa primary were contested. Buttigieg tried to pull a coup, and tried to pull a coup back there, and then what became the Super Tuesday massacre of both Klobuchar and Buttigieg dropping out and immediately endorsing Biden. That pretty much was and pledging their delegates to Biden, and that was pretty much the beginning of the end. But one other thing that I'd like to put into context here, I think that's the nature of almost anybody who approaches any kind of politics from a progressive standpoint, is that eventually they will come to I sincerely believe that a lot of these people, outside of maybe Bernie or maybe Nina Turner, the rest of them never had it in them to truly fight for progressive causes. I mean, for heaven's sake, look at AOC and how she's turned. I'm going to say it right now. She's turned full lib. I mean, it started with the force the vote issue, in which hundreds of people on social media were calling her and the rest of the squad, which, let's be real, was an invention by the media, not something that they came up by themselves, to withhold their vote to confirm Nancy Pelosi and leverage it for universal health care. On a moral standpoint, on an ethical standpoint, they shouldn't have voted for quite possibly the most despicable politician right now, second only to quite possibly Mitch McConnell. But they showed they showed who they were, basically. And now, AOC insisting that, hey, those kids in cages this was Trump's problem. It's like, no, this was Biden's problem. This was Biden's doing back when he was VP during the Obama administration. And just like her, Yang is in the situation too, where he's being found out as just another fraud, basically.
Yeah, like hands down, I would say when they threw Bernie under the bus, they even though they were knowingly going into an election where their argument was going to be, um, morally speaking, you have to choose Biden over Trump. They were at that time making the choice, not Biden over Bernie, but because Bernie was leading, they made the choice of Trump over Bernie. They'd rather risk Trump than get Bernie. And that is the whole point behind all of their garbage. So this is the thing, like you bring up AOC. Yeah, this is how politicians get corrupted. They think they're being clever. They think they're being smart. They think they're making actual concessions and deals that matter, but it just puts a bunch of blinders on them because they suddenly decide that it's okay to lie to the public as a major part of their job. Right. AOC might still very well have the best of intentions in mind, but she's become utterly stupid like the rest of them. Just thinking, oh, I'll bullshit the public. I'll tell them shit that they know I'm lying to their faces about. And that's not going to translate as betrayal. I'll still have that cult following going, right? No, fuck you. Don't lie to me. I know you're lying to me. Knock it off.
And let's this is going to remain this remains to be seen. And as far as Yang, I'll believe it when I see it. When it comes to any sort of when's the election for NYC mayor anyway?
It's coming up in June, actually. I just looked at that a little bit ago. But I guess, yeah, I just have mixed feelings about, on the one hand, I guess, how would you guys feel like if he wins this election? Like, it is somewhat of a...
Is there a legitimate progressive or otherwise leftist contender? Has Yang, is there just nobody else? Has Yang taken that spot, or is there another contender out there, basically?
Well, there's still, I'm not aware of a more progressive contender. I haven't like deep dived into the other candidates. I just thought it was interesting because it looks like he's leading in the polls. I know there's a significant portion of undecided in the polls, so it's definitely not like it's in the bag or anything like that, but it looks like he is like a viable possibility. He's not running some come from behind long shot. Like he's in it. So I just thought that was interesting, and it was just making me think about how do I really feel about Andrew Yang, and I feel very, very mixed about it. And I feel like he, like tweets like that, like you said, like it's so. I just feel like it plays to this idea of like if you can afford a spot, you're somehow better than someone who can't afford to rent a space to sell your items. And I just feel like just recently, well, not recently, but like last year, I remember I was driving home from Vaughn's and I saw this guy selling he was selling tacos on the side of the road, and I saw the cops come and shut him down. And I'm just like, why? Like, why? Like, who cares? He's just selling tacos. And like, who cares? And this is in the Valley where no one else is around. So like, I get that that's different than New York, perhaps. But I feel like, yeah, he's making this appeal to like a sort of upper lower middle class where it's like, I can afford a little space, so I'm better than you because you're on the street. And it's just like, I just feel like, why is it got to be one or the other? It should be both and he tries to say that in the tweet, but it's like, it's kind of too late. You already kind of made that appeal. So
right. I legitimately hope that a more leftist or more progressive candidate, somebody who has better convictions, who has more conviction than Andrew Yang, challenges him. It remains to be seen what's going to happen in that election. Although I do remember Cynthia Nixon was trying to run for governor of New York, and she did. For what it was worth, it seemed that her heart was in the right place. So
yeah, I liked Cynthia Nixon.
I liked her too. So let's hope. Let's put a pin in this and let's see how this goes. But as I know, I think we're in agreement. Not great, Andrew Yang. Not great at all.
not stands.
Exactly. Okay, so the next topic for discussion is our governor is trying to announce that the state will be reopened, and he's planning on so I believe that he's attempting to stagger reopening. I don't think that he wants one big grand reopening to happen all at once. As far as I'm concerned, I have no intention of going anywhere until I am going to get vaccinated later on this week. So I have no intention of doing anything until I'm fully vaccinated, or at minimum, the pandemic has fully gone away. But what's everybody's thought on the state reopening? Is it too soon, or?
It's June 15th, right? That's the date we're planning, that he's planning.
Well, let's look it up real quick. Actually, California.
I will say that, I mean, I was cleared for a vaccine. I'm going to be getting my first shot on, I think it's Tuesday. So I will say that
Okay.
do think it's getting really likely that we're going to be able to like return to normal life here in California.
Okay. So
in the future.
I'm reading from CBS News. California to fully reopen June 15th if state meets specific criteria, governor says. Now, to be fair, June does, it's to be fair to the governor and his administration, it's not like he's attempting to do this all at once. But at the same time, I genuinely don't believe that, I don't think that we should be reopening this year altogether. The best way that we could tend to this, or to confront this pandemic head on, is if the governor were to provide a regular stipend to every person here in the state of California and told them, hunker down for 2 weeks, we'll provide, and we would be out of this pandemic. I sincerely believe that. I mean, that's exactly what New Zealand did, and they seem to be relatively COVID-free, basically. I just have I guess you could call it a sense of resentment, because it kind of feels that it's not even, they're putting more priority on business matters, on reopening the state to bring back tourism, to bring back industry, instead of the safety of individual Californians. Because even with all these vaccines, people still need to get boosters. People still need to get, regular doses, basically. I don't think, it almost feels like the vaccine is kind of a stopgap, and nobody, the powers that be, aren't willing to provide, basically. It's essentially, hey, we're going to throw you into the ocean, and if you sink or swim, well, that's on you. If you haven't learned how to swim yet, that's on you, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that's been kind of how it's gone, I feel like, the whole time. And definitely, like, the US seemed to have one of the worst economic responses from the outset to the pandemic. I think, to me, the biggest thing lurking in the background is kind of, there's still questions around the variant, and also how long, like you said, Ruben, how long the vaccination lasts, or if boosters will be required. So I definitely think there's still more question marks. And to me, like, my mindset has been, I don't get why people are in as much of a hurry. Particularly, like, I'm going to be fully vaccinated in a couple of weeks, and my mindset has been, there's no point in like putting myself at risk to catch it right before I'm able to get vaccinated. And then, like, I'll feel really stupid after going this whole year, doing so much to like not catch it. So in that regard, I feel like things have opened too quickly, but I do also feel like that's sort of been due to a lot, like, political pressures, like we talked about last time we talked. Newsom's under, the stress of a recall effort from a lot of people who feel like we never should have shut down or something. So I think that's a big part of what he's responding to, and what's factored into this. And I agree, that doesn't seem like it's really based on like what's safest.
Could also be a play to try and drum up support for what's going to be looking like in a rather likely recall election that's going to be coming up in the next couple of months, I think.
Exactly.
something I think worth noting while we're on this topic is the comment that was made by the former CDC director.
Mhm.
Did you guys come across that?
Was that his CNN interview?
Might have been. Basically, he said that he believed that COVID was created in a lab.
Yeah.
Ah,
Yeah,
Well, he
Um,
believed that it should be investigated further, right? He believed we
Right.
shouldn't rule it out. He didn't.
Yeah.
He wasn't gonna say he necessarily believed
no,
that.
it
or
wasn't
did he?
a conclusion that he was arriving at, like a
Right.
verified conclusion, but it is his personal belief, like
Okay.
that he's established, given, but that's not really what caught me about that interview. It's the line that he inserted in there that that it's common for people who are investigating a virus to catch said virus that they are investigating
Yeah.
in a lab. Now, I followed up on this with a doctor who's been keeping me and lots of others informed. I don't have his name here, and because he texted me directly, maybe it's best that not to share his name.
Okay.
But basically, he told me, I asked him to follow up, like, okay, could you give me feedback about this particular comment from the CDC director? Is it actually common for people who study a virus to catch the said infection that they're studying? And obviously, in my head, I'm panicking as a science major. I'm thinking, then there should be a question as to whether or not it's even ethical to be studying these. That would be like on a scale of saying, why are we studying it as we study in the same way? Why are we studying like to make bigger nuclear bombs?
Right.
So so he got back to me and he told me that the data is inconclusive. Wait, so
Inconclusive.
no, he says he isn't correct. The virus was not made in a lab. The data are conclusive, and infection in labs doesn't happen very often, luckily. So that gave me some reassurance.
Have you guys or Steve? Have you looked at the guy who's saying this? Yeah, he's like former CDC.
Yeah, former
personnel.
CDC director. Maybe I should grab his name because he's his public. Former CDC director interview.
Because so we know he worked really high up in the CDC. So I don't. Yeah, I mean, it's bizarre.
So I'm pulling
Robert
up right.
Redfield.
Yeah, Robert. Robert
Redfield.
And yes, and my first intent is, and Mr. Redfield did qualify his statement saying that he does not believe for a second that the release of the virus was done at a malicious intent. He says that this was more than likely a pure accident. But first off, to what you said, Steve, I think the reason why we investigate viruses like this in the first place is to develop vaccines and treatments, and to a certain extent I know that you brought the metaphor of design nuclear weapons, but there's no way to really prepare for nuclear war. Basically, once the bombs drop, we're all destroyed. But at the very least, with infectious diseases, you can develop treatments and vaccines to prepare for that. So I think that's the main value in disease research, and whatever lab was, if this was an accident in a lab, that's what their intent was. But when I initially heard of that, I was a little skeptical, because it's not so much that that this isn't likely, or that this guy, that he doesn't have credence in what he says, but at the same time, it's like anti-China sentiment is at an all-time high right now. I'm not saying that that Mr. Redfield is putting this out there to make China look like the bad guy. He might have another motive altogether. But what I am saying is that you got to be careful how you say this kind of stuff, because we're seeing right now, innocent bystanders being attacked and gunned down because they're Asian, basically. I know for a fact that the current administration is ramping up this new Cold War against China, and they're using the virus as justification, basically. I saw on Democracy Now! A couple weeks ago that the biggest pushers, some of the biggest pushers for this new Cold War essentially are Silicon Valley, because I don't know if you all remember, but Hunwei, or their a Chinese telecom or phone developing firm, was sued by the U.S. government,
Mhm.
and it was because these Silicon Valley firms who aren't even producing, they're coming up with the designs and having them manufactured in China. They're scared. They know for a fact that if a firm in China is able to they're able to both design and produce new technologies, that's the end for them, basically. So whatever is brought out, if anybody tries to put out there that this most likely was, we all know that that came out of China, but for anybody to add to that, to say in Redfield's case that this came out of a lab and this was by accident, you have to be careful, because like I said, there's anti-Chinese sentiments going on right now. And as far as I'm concerned, I try to live my life by this simple philosophy of don't give people ideas, basically. And this guy is giving people ideas.
Bad ideas. Yeah.
Exactly.
So
So you neither of you like believe it, or
I'm gonna say this. Anything's possible, basically.
right?
It's just as likely, I believe, that this was an accident at a infectious disease lab, as this was from somebody eating an infected bat or coming into contact with an infected bat. But at the same time, I'm not going to, this thing is too big for us to be
Yeah.
certain of anything, basically.
Hmm.
And we, especially as Americans, shouldn't come as some sort of, well, China should pay for this or China should answer, because what's the way that we dictate that kind of stuff? It's through military intervention, it's through sanctions, it's through anything and everything that would provoke or escalate things. And
Mhm.
I don't think that we should be dictating this kind of stuff. That if anybody, it should be the international community, basically, who should dictate investigations or or retribution or justice or whatever
Like the
comes out of this.
UN, or
Exactly, the UN
Yeah,
should be dictating this.
I'd say there is one punishment that I think it should be welcome to the Chinese government, and that it's to demand that they go along with the CDC
Mhm.
and safety regulations that are advised by the CDC, in spite of the CDC being completely free to identify Taiwan as an actual country. Like, go fuck yourselves. You can't just dictate like a loss of free speech to the CDC just because you've got your head up your ass about the reality of things.
What's the other disease? There's the CDC and there's the international, the
WHO.
World Health Organization.
exactly.
Who?
The WHO should be, because the
Yeah.
CDC is an American institution, basically. So if, to your point, Steve, if the CDC were to try to investigate, they would be doing it on American terms. It should be the WHO. And
Yeah.
the WHO, I know that WHO isn't perfect, but you know, they're the ones to do this kind of thing, not the CDC, as far as I'm concerned. The CDC should be primarily concerned with handling the disease on a domestic level, basically.
My thoughts about the lab theory were that it was often brought up in conspiracy theory circles, and it was often brought up as sort of like a justification for not taking the virus seriously. Like we shouldn't have to wear masks if this thing came from a lab, which is like obviously not illogical.
A lot of shit
But
comes out of a lab, so they're all dangerous.
so, and yeah, in general, my thoughts are it's kind of this distraction. I'm always in favor of an investigation. But to me, well, especially initially to me, I was like, what difference does it make? Because we're in the middle of a crisis. Like, what difference does it make to be trying to figure it out? I feel like now as we're kind of getting towards the end of it, it makes more sense to maybe like talk about it or to reflect on it or whatever. Like yeah, like I said, I'm always in favor of an investigation. I think that in general, I've just always thought of it as like sensationalism. Obviously, though, this is different because this is someone from the actual CDC speaking out. But yeah, and also like what you said, Ruben, it really invokes the sort of troubled U.S. Chinese relations right now, which I think is, there's a lot of layers to that.
To pivot off what you said, David, the thing is though, they're describing this pandemic in terms of waves. This isn't waves. This is a flood. We're all neck deep and we're barely treading water right now. So I have no compunctions, or I don't have any plans. I don't want us to open up anytime soon. As far as I'm concerned, my gut is telling me we're going to be in this until 2022, maybe 2023. I mean, I'm not sure how long the original influenza pandemic took, but I can only
It was in waves as well.
Yeah, but
it's still going. Like
Yeah.
the flu is
Yeah,
still
yeah.
going.
but to a point where we could say that this isn't a
Sure.
pandemic anymore. This isn't that we could routinely become vaccinated and vaccinated against this disease. I don't think that's going to happen for at least another year, basically.
But
So
if we get to a point where we can routinely vaccinate against the coronavirus, the COVID-19, then we will actually be at a point where we could handle it better than the flu, because
Right.
it has less of those issues than the flu does. It just happens that like it's pretty much almost equally infectious, right? But
Right.
it also kills a lot of its victims, so that actually makes it hard for it to spread in a lot of cases as well.
To
So
that though, I want to bring up the reality that I'm going to say at least a fourth of all Americans don't believe in vaccines, or refuse to get vaccines because they're part of the MAGA cult. There's no reaching them, basically, or they're conspiratorially minded, basically. And if you have so much as a quarter or 20% of the population who refuses to get vaccinated, that's where new strains, new mutations come about. And what started as
Right.
COVID-19 could easily become COVID-20 or 21 is what I'm trying to point out, basically.
okay.
So I have absolutely no faith in what we have here is a privatized healthcare system to meet the needs and to effectively confront this massive catastrophe. Basically, if we had universal health care, if we had a system that would provide for us, that was a collective, some sort of collectivist effort to provide for us, I would have full faith in vaccinations and us reaching out of this. But we don't. I am going to get vaccinated, but I am still hesitant because these companies, Pfizer's, Moderna, they've been involved in some heinous shit. Let's not make two ways about it. And on top of that, you have hostile elements who want to otherwise interfere or disrupt vaccination instances. You have pharmacy technicians and pharmacy staff that are deciding to play God and leave the vaccine out in order for it to go bad. And on top of that, let's not forget how a week ago up in Jersey, where all these vaccines are being manufactured, they mixed up the ingredients. So
yeah, the truth seekers who are like, breaking into these facilities because they got themselves, they know what's really going on and decide to spoil all this just to save some people.
like
Yeah,
I don't want to
great
sound doom.
guys.
I don't want to sound doom and gloom here, guys, but we're at this point to where I'm counting down the days to where a violent mass casualty event happens at a vaccination site or a hospital or something like this. Basically, we're on the precipice of this. So what I would say to our eventual viewers and listeners is, if you want to get vaccinated, go ahead. I can't speak to what's going on, but just be aware that in a better society, in a better country, the vaccine wouldn't be the primary means of confronting this disease. We would be fully quarantined and provided for. Just be aware. If for any reason you feel that something's wrong, like ask your the pharmacy technicians or the doctor, hey, is this vaccine secure? Has it not been tampered with? Be aware if you see somebody, unmasked people, get out of there at a moment's notice. Basically, this is where we live in, and I certainly wish it wasn't the situation, but that's the reality that we're in right now.
You know what I really wish, or what I'm really nervous about, is not necessarily um, what is it called? I'm not an anti-vaxxer. Let me preface it by this, but
Right.
these vaccines were developed during the Trump administration's response.
Mm-hmm.
So whilst I have a great deal of confidence in some of the pharmaceuticals I get, I mean, because I get my vaccines almost every single year, to get these things out so quickly, something must have. It seems fishy. Something must have gone. Some standards were lowered. The Trump administration knew that everything hinged on them getting this out as quickly as possible. When
Right.
you have these sorts of incentives at your back, and you have an administration which is already unfriendly towards regulations in any given industry, towards standards in any given industry, I'm wondering if there was some chicanery going on at the what is it called? It's
CDC.
no, the Food and Drug Administration.
FDA.
Right.
Yeah, the FDA.
To that, I would like to bring up another thing, is that we're all speaking from a place of concern because none of us have any faith in the powers that be, the healthcare, the federal and state governments. We have absolutely no faith in them, to where something that should be as routine as vaccinations that we all do on a regular basis for stuff like the flu or any means of other infectious diseases, we're all kind of taken aback, and it's like we all have some kind of reservations, like this came about too quickly, or look at what's the response to it. And
Well, so I would worry less about how quickly things come about, because you got to give some faith to the people that are in the science community and
Right.
are willing to put these things through clinical trials. They know their job well, and a lot of them, not universally, but a lot of them, I'd even go so far as to say the majority of scientists who work in these on these drugs are they have a great sense of integrity. The real thing, like if you really want to look for signs of red flags of dumb fuckery going on, it's product placement, like Trump's insertion of Regeneron into his bit. Like that's where you want to go. Okay, yeah, you're basically financially connected.
and on
That's
top of
obvious.
that and on top of that what really concerns me is the fact that I'm getting the Moderna vaccine, which comes in 2 doses, but I've heard that other vaccines, they would require regular boosters and stuff like that.
Well, they're
Or
still
like-
determined. It's still TBD at the end of the day.
Right.
They don't know how long
Mhm.
immunity lasts
Well,
for the vaccines. We're gonna find out in real time. The last article I read said it's at least 6 months that they're seeing
Mhm.
solid immunity, and then I
And-
assume we'll hopefully in 3 months we'll hear it's 9 months. Hopefully it lasts forever, but we
But-
don't know.
what compunction or what's keeping these pharmaceutical companies from charging for the next booster or for the next dose?
Oh, that's
basically?
yeah. That tension's for sure going to be there. It's already there. Yeah, they're trying. These companies are
Exactly.
trying to figure out how they can profit off of it.
Mhm.
Versus people in government are like, we know the pitchforks are coming, so we're going to have to hold off on that. You're going to have to wait a minute to profit off of this. And so that tension for sure is there. It's going
If
on.
only we
with the
had more
patent.
sulks out there, or just
Yeah.
willing to put out their stuff for free. Just go on ahead. Just
So
go
Yeah.
on and take
I
it.
just want to go back to the point, just to respond to your point about comparing research in viruses to research in nukes and what have you. I definitely I confess it's not exactly the same thing. The moral question though stands like this for me is, I mean, number one, I'm confident, especially now that I've gotten confirmation, there are definitely ways to sanitize and maintain a space, a biome if necessary, from being able to get contaminated from anything in particular you're trying to prevent contamination of.
Mhm.
That being said, you have you have this idea of if it's in the one case, like say you go back to long before we had those kinds of methodologies, you had to still study viruses like the Black Plague in live time as a doctor, and you were just doing guesswork on what could work, what might not work, and trying things out and risking your life every step of the way. Even to this day, you see pretty much the same risk being had with trying to help with Ebola. The problem isn't so much like dealing with the threat as it is and risking things in that way. The problem is when you have a lab and your objective is to study this disease. So what you do is you bioengineer it to get it with some variants of RNA, DNA in it that will cause it to be like others that have done far worse damage or been better in some things than others, and you are trying to actually make it hot, make it volatile, which is what the CDC director was describing. If you're in a lab like that and your whole idea is you're bioengineering it to try and make it hot, to try and make it deadly and effective as a killer of human beings, and then you're telling me, oh yeah, by the way, most of the time these kind of things get out and people who are working on them get infected. Like, you don't do that research where you're making it improved.
You know what lab you're working in there. I mean, just right. Oof.
I mean, don't let, or if people are working in there, put them in a biome that they cannot leave until they have proven they do not have an infection. Let them die there if necessary.
You know, I have a little bit of experience in this. I used to work for a pharmaceutical company. I was doing like, grunt work, office grunt work, as it were. And they trained us like, hey, this is where we manufacture the drugs. You got to, you got to get dressed up in protective gear and all that kind of stuff. So I would imagine that, a infectious disease lab would be that much more stringent, basically. I wouldn't be surprised if they were dousing them in disinfectant every time. It's like, like, I can only speculate, basically. I don't know if that really happens, but I think the point is here that, there's a lot to be asked of. There's a lot to be, I sincerely hope that if once we get out of this, we as a country have a long get together and a long talk and a long reckoning over, there's no way the next pandemic will be so much worse. And the only way that we can prevent it or meet it head on is universal healthcare at this point. Like, I sincerely hope nothing gets done in this country without something getting destroyed, basically. And I sincerely hope that's the unfortunate reality of this country, but I sincerely hope that what comes out of this is universal healthcare first and foremost.
Yeah, one would hope anyway.
So we're approaching an hour right now. Do we want to go on a little bit longer and bring up Myanmar, or?
Up to you folks. I can give us a brief overview, or we can just end it here.
I got time.
How about you, David?
Yeah, I'd love to hear Isaac's thoughts on Myanmar.
Okay, go ahead, Isaac. Let's go ahead and hear about what's going on in Myanmar.
Well, a few months ago, Myanmar had a democratic election, and the prevailing Democratic Party over there succeeded with a great majority. However, the armed forces of the country, with whom they had a tentative agreement and with whom they were sharing power, did not exactly like this development, and so on claims of election fraud and numerous other things, took control of the country, dissolved the parliament, and arrested the cabinet and the prime minister or the state councillor.
Now, I wanted to interject here because from what I recall, there was this really surreal video of a fitness instructor doing an outdoor session, and right behind her there were
the coup was taking place.
Yes.
Yeah, it was awfully surreal. And the thing that one must understand about the country is that this is not a full democracy. This country had been in a under a military dictatorship for many years.
Hmm.
The recent sort of semi-democratic period only sort of began in like 2008 when they came to sort of a compromise agreement, and in this, the military, whom still maintains a great deal of economic power over the country because they've got their hands in quite a few things across the nation, has almost like an independence, a nominal independence from the civilian government. The ministries that pertain to the Army and Navy and all the other branches are run by the military. Those members of the cabinet are appointed by the military. The parliament, which is nominally elected, actually has a significant portion. I believe it's about a quarter, which is appointed by the military. So no matter what the democratic result is, you can't change the constitution because there's going to always be a quarter of the parliament permanently in the hands of the military. But this was thought to not necessarily be enough, because when Aung San
Right.
Suu Kyi's party was successful in gaining this landslide victory, it really set the tone that, well, now we have a mandate. Now we can maybe revise the Constitution, though we can't really meet that limit. We have the legitimacy to pursue those sorts of aims, and this they could not allow to go along. So they clamped down on it really hard. There was a lot of thought that something like this would happen shortly after the election, and here it was.
Something occurs to me. So I don't know if you can answer this, but is that what is that what makes this a coup and not? Because one kind of I could say hot take was what happened in DC on January 6th. I didn't want to call it a coup because if it was a coup, there would be an organized force storming the halls of Congress, armed and taking hostages. That it was more of a riot or an insurrection, basically. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts, though, on? Oh,
As to whether or not, strictly speaking, this is a coup?
well, what makes this a coup compared to what happened in DC back January 6th, basically?
Well, this isn't a bunch of disaffected citizens marching on the Capitol. This is the armed forces as a political force seizing control of the government. Now, there are provisions in the Constitution where a state of emergency and where martial law can be enacted, but they acted independently in this endeavor. They went ahead, they arrested the people with whom they're supposed to be, taking orders from, namely the president and the state counselor, and whether or not those resignations were forced or what so have you, those people were no longer in those positions. A new president was appointed by the military, and a new state counselor was appointed to fill in their place, and martial law was declared. It is, using the term coup is not, well, I mean, like the term regime. It's like, oh, it's a government I don't like, I call it a regime instead of the government of this country. No, it's an out and out coup. The military has acted cohesively to overthrow the sitting government of the country.
So
Okay.
I have a question.
And I think
Yes.
I have a question. Was the new prime minister / president / leader suspected of terrorism?
No, voting fraud.
Oh, okay.
I'm being entirely serious.
that works.
Voting fraud and corruption.
I'm just saying because in America, like terrorism trumps everything. So
Well, yeah, no,
that'd
no.
be cool.
Here's the thing: if it was terrorism or possibly the possession of a dangerous substance like oil, I think that we would have been the first one in there. But as for this, there is no oil in Myanmar that I'm aware of that would set us off. So I'm afraid to say that this was done even under murky conditions or pretexts, even for us. Jesus Christ! But it does, I think, remind us that fascism is only so far away in many parts of the world. We
Yeah.
have it really easy here in the West when we're so apart. I mean, from Europe, you can see the far right, marching, goose stepping across all of Europe. But I mean, there are some countries in which it is still the old breed that still lingers out in the hills or in the boardrooms or in the barracks, just waiting for the moment to come out. And there you are, and now hundreds of people are dying over there in that country because the people have had their taste of democracy, and they're not going to let it go.
Ruben, you're muted, I think.
Yeah, I noticed. Quick question to you, Isaac. Is there any CIA fuckery going on?
Here's the problem from a geopolitical point of view. We didn't sponsor this.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's one would think, oh, a coup. Well, I guess that was no, and there's a great deal of debate over who might have given them the okay, because the military couldn't have gone ahead without at least having an assurance that somebody was going to have their corner. And I mean, the Russian government tends to act in sort of a global opposition to whomever we support or something along those lines. They've had a rather nuanced sort of position on the coup, but I it's unclear whether or not they might have been the ones who gave the military the sort of the go ahead. A lot of people, and this is, well, it's vogue to say China is behind everything. China, has a working relationship with the military and has been covering their backs more or less as one could in the UN, but it's really unclear as to whom sort of gave them the assurances they need to sort of undertake this move, because it was awfully dramatic, and we had actually been sanctioning the military in Myanmar for quite a while because they were essentially running the country. They would not give way to a civilian government.
Well, thanks for the international report, Isaac.
Fight fascism, boys. Come on.
Heck yes. So that remains to be seen. I certainly hope that the good people of Myanmar are able to see this through. But I would like to reiterate that the reason why I brought up CIA fuckery is that CIA has been involved. They have their hands involved everywhere. So should we come out of this and it turned out, yeah, CIA did have some kind of involvement, I'm like, but I just want to state this, that there is some sort of what you could call narcissism being in Americans, that we feel that we're involved. If something happens, we're involved some way.
It must be us. It must be us.
Yeah. And I want to acknowledge that, but at the same time, it's like when we fuck up globally. So
Do you guys think, like, in an ideal world, right, the international community would be able to respond to a coup by coming in and pushing that government back, or are you more isolationist in that we should let countries deal with their own stuff?
I want to point out that I learned about this, or at the very least I brushed up about this recently. What happened in Rwanda and the ethnic genocide that happened there. The Blue Helmets, the UN peacekeepers, they either had their hands tied or they otherwise did fuck all to try to intervene and do something and to intervene in the conflict, basically. So first off,
and this is the problem, is that the reality is that our military is so problematic. So in reality, we know we can't depend on this. But in an ideal world, like if we could have our ideal situation, would that be the goal? Would be to be able to interfere here and be like, stop cooing, like
I think a situation that and
Or is
and
that always going to be a colonialist mindset of like, let me go fix it over there, as
I
opposed to they can.
I don't want a Godwin here. I don't want a Godwin, but we didn't involve ourselves in World War II until the Japanese struck at us, and Germany and the two of them said, "Yeah, we're together in on this," and decided to tee off. And they're like, "Well, now we're dragged in, basically." Now, the goings on in Myanmar, I don't think whatever goes on there, I know that I'm ignorant in saying this, but I would imagine that it's isolated to that part of the world. Basically, us interfering would turn out to be another Vietnam or an Afghanistan, to where we're just going to we're just going to pour gasoline on this fire, basically. So
Yeah,
I am
yeah.
isolationist only in the sense that I don't trust us for a goddamn second to resolve anything.
And that's a real big issue, is that where exactly is the place of the international community, at what point? And when people say to push that government out, I mean, what do we mean? Do we mean sanctions, a battery of sanctions on that country? Because right now the international community is hammering Myanmar's military and the country. Even the U.S. I mean, give it to Joe Biden. He actually, the moment this happened, he threatened sanctions, and then
So we
several
all
days.
agree sanctions are good then.
Well, I mean,
in this
look at
world,
Cuba.
or-
And
Cuba, Iran, Venezuela. I mean, the sanctions are more often than not starving
Yeah.
the poor and the destitute, basically.
Okay, yeah.
So I would be, my default is, hey, don't get involved. Let them sort it out, because the moments that we have gotten involved, I mean, for fuck's sake, we're still in Afghanistan, and it was only recently that we got out of Iraq, basically. So
I mean, like my stance is the last war that we entered that was at all justifiable was World War II.
Mhm.
And I was recently reading about a socialist activist whose name I don't remember, who was protesting against our involvement in World War II. And I just thought that was weird. Like, is it still something we feel like maybe we shouldn't have gotten involved in World War II?
it had been the socialist position for a while to be strictly against war. They had a real strong pacifist streak for the longest time. They opposed World War One. They opposed World War II on the similar on similar grounds. Now the thing with hindsight, we can look back and say, "Oh my God, the Holocaust! Oh my God,
Right.
this." But I mean, Nazi Germany was not the world's first anti-Semitic government. I mean,
Mhm.
we fought on the side of an anti-Semitic government during World War One. Which one?
Yep.
The Russian government, which was prior to Nazi Germany, the world's most anti-Semitic country that had ever existed. I mean, please, the pogroms of what is it called? It's of the Pale of Settlement, I must admit, could be regarded as almost, what is it called? It's a first step towards what eventually would become the Holocaust.
Mhm.
Y-
And there
Where do you
during
draw the line
and the First
as a
World
socialist?
War, and during the First World War, there was the massacre and the genocide of the Armenians too, on done
Most
by
certainly.
the Ottoman Empire. I think where we're, and I wanted to ask Isaac. I just wanted to bring up a take. What was stopping those same, well, to the group? What was stopping those same socialists who were opposing intervention in the Second World War from joining the Russian side, basically?
Well, I will say one thing. I mean, that regardless of one's political opinion, to take it to the farthest logical extreme, it's like, yeah, well, I think America should intervene in this conflict. Then does that then mean, well, stick to your principles, pick up a rifle, and go fight in Spain like Ernst Hemingway? And I'm like, oh God, I think that's a little much for any one person.
Wasn't
But
him?
what?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think it fair enough. I mean, I think that you can have a political opinion whilst not sort of be obligated to take it to the farthest extreme. Like, yeah, I think that you should be able to say that you're in favor of intervention in Europe if you're in, like, during the World War II period, and then sort of, not say, well, stick to your principles, go and enlist. Like,
I
well,
I don't know about that, to be honest. Like, I'm probably biased because I'm a veteran, but I'm like, you know what? If you want to start a war, then you should be in it.
Wait, Steve,
Um,
you're a veteran?
fair
yeah,
enough.
I didn't know
um,
that.
yeah. Air Force, 3 years. It didn't really work out. I don't recommend the military to anybody as a result.
Mhm.
But if you join, I know you join for the right reasons. Like, it just goes in hand with, if you're going to be willing to put your life out there to the extent that the military requires, you've got all of the integrity that you need to at least start with. They might still wear you down, but that's you join for the right reasons.
My attitude has always been, I'm not afraid to fight in a war that I believe in. I don't think I'd be very helpful. I'm not really built for it, but I'm not afraid of that. I would never join the U.S. military because I feel like it is just fundamentally, again, like I support and I thank you, Steve, for your service, but I don't
Oh my
believe.
God.
Don't mention it.
I don't believe that our military is being directed in good faith at all. I don't believe in any of the overall fundamental initiatives of what we're doing.
No, it's a blood money racket. That's what the U.S. military is, and it's been going on since Vietnam, if not earlier. So I'm right there with you in that. Like, I think people, when they join for the right reasons, but that doesn't make those reasons smart.
Right. But it just creates this dynamic where, with what's going on in Myanmar, it's like you sort of are between a rock and a hard place in terms of, do you believe we should be? It's like, do you believe we should be doing anything? But at the same time, like our military is so co-opted by profiteering that we could never trust our military, or and I guess obviously the in between is diplomacy, which is I guess what we're doing. But then like we mentioned, that's got unintended consequences because it affects the people who are not.
I've been waiting to get in this point. Basically, where I'm coming from on that whole thing, as far as like international policy or when to get involved in other people's wars. I think there's plenty of room to be said that one country has all the reasons to want to be involved in some way or another of another country's war, especially we're sharing the same big blue rock that we're on here, right? So I think the trouble is that you have to first set a foundation of integrity and humanism as the justifying reasons for getting involved. So there's probably no line in the sand that I would say like over such and such issues we can't get involved, but I would say you need to justify that there is a inhumane, there's inhumanity, there's human rights being refused or denied, and those human rights could even be agreed to as a right to a fair and honest vote within your country if we get to that point as a world, right? As a planet and a species, to say a right to a fair vote is a human right. I would love to see that day come. That day has not even come for Americans as it is, because our ballots are fucking rigged and you don't have good voting systems. You have first past the post, which is fucking it all up and not really getting what the people want representing them. So yeah, there's lots of steps that the US needs to take and to look in a fucking mirror before it goes and gets involved in other people's wars today. But in the ideal future that we should be moving towards, I think it's perfectly reasonable to think as an international law, international community among many nation states, what we should establish as human rights that should always be respected no matter what country you're in, like the right to believe what you fucking want to believe. Sorry, Saudi Arabia, you're not doing that one very well. Then we can, like, once we've established those human rights and agreed to them, continue further with diplomacy and doing something a hell of a lot better than sanctions, although just with just as little blood spilled, hopefully, in terms of being able to make that work.
One thing that
I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead, Isaac. I wanted to ask one dumb question, but go ahead.
Well, I mean, I certainly appreciate the point you brought up there, Steve. And then that sort of leaves the question: then until we sort of create that more perfect union here, does that then mean that we must turn a blind eye to the affairs of the world? I mean, is it not equally immoral then that when we have this power at our disposal to actually change the world, that we sit on it until we are sort of ready, like we are sort of philosophically ready, like once we've perfected our democracy and worked out the kinks, then now we can sit here and sort of, go to the world and say, this is how you must do it.
So I wouldn't say we should be turning a blind eye. Obviously, always expose the truth for what it is. Report, do spy work, whatever is necessary to be able to let the whole world know what's happening. That's first and foremost. But from there, it might not even take all that much for us to get at least some baseline of integrity out of ourselves so that we can go do something to help. It's kind of like if we still had slavery in place, right? And the option was, well, we've got a slave army we could send over there and they'll probably get killed, but it'll do some greater good for the world, right? So there's our moral question being asked is it okay that we don't first end slavery and then find a volunteer force to go do the work? Or should we just send the slave army to go die for shit that they had nothing to do with?
One question that I wanted to ask to Isaac, you talked about the Spanish Civil War. I know that Ernest Hemingway wrote about the Spanish Civil War. Was he involved though? Was he on the ground?
I think he actually did go to Spain, and I think a lot of other writers went there. I think Blair went there as well. I don't. A lot of folks actually volunteered. A lot of politically active fellas volunteered and went over there to fight against fascism. You give them their credit; they put their money where their mouth is. I mean, it's like, you don't like fascism across the planet. All right, pick up a rifle and go to Spain. I just fear for the day that I could sit here and say, well, I mean, I personally don't like the military dictatorship of this country, and it's like, okay, well, pick up a rifle and go to Syria. Put your money where your mouth is. Like, God dang it! I mean, I feel that whilst it is a little hollow that one who's not willing to fight should sort of call for others to shed blood for what one perceives as a greater good. I mean, that's sort of hypocritical when you think about it. But I would like to think that as long as everybody gets the same destination, that we all agree this is an evil and it must be purged from the world, then I mean those little inconsistencies don't necessarily matter as much. But I mean, that's just me.
Well,
Okay.
I guess to your point, just to give you some credit in there, Isaac, it's definitely not my belief that a person should not have any opinion whatsoever about man, it would really be great if somebody would do something about this this military coup taking place here, just to want something like that, to have an opinion of better to not have that military coup, might be worth taking some risks. That's not exactly what I would mean when I'm if you're willing to go, or if you want a war. It's more if you're really strictly stating we need to go to war now, right? If you're the one making the vote and saying, yeah, we got to do it now, making that decision, then you're the one that should be willing to risk just as much sacrifice as anybody else who's going to be a part of it, if that makes sense.
Hashtag draft Congress.
Yes.
Yes.
Draft Congress and their kids. Now, we have gone a little long, but that's okay. I want to thank everybody here. A lot of good topics, a lot of good opinions here, a lot of good discussion. I think now is a good time as any time to end. Does anybody have any final thoughts? David, you have any final thoughts on all this?
I don't think I have any final thoughts. But I did think that was a really interesting conversation, especially at the end. I really look forward to talking more about international issues. And thank you to Isaac for bringing knowledge around that.
Thank you, Isaac, for being our unofficial international correspondent.
I'll pass that on.
And one more thing before we leave. I just want to point out that the last time we had this discussion, we did bring up Ireland, and I know things are escalating as we speak. So
yeah,
solidarity, and I sincerely hope that the good people of Ireland are able to properly become independent of England, and the empire needs to go.
Lord have mercy, please. No, let's not get into this again. But please,
Okay.
Maybe
Okay.
next
people of
time.
Northern Ireland, throw your guns into the sea. Come on.
Yeah. Okay. So I think we should end that and end that here. Thanks everybody, and we hope to hear everybody tune in for our next episode.
Yay.
Late.